and gentlemen of the jury. In all criminal cases, it begins with an indictment. An indictment represents a roadmap of exactly what the state of Ohio has to show in their case. The indictment is, I'm going to read the indictment to you now just to give you an idea. I like to do that at the beginning of all my cases, to read the indictment, to give you the basis of what we're going to be looking for throughout this case, and then to give you a little bit of background about what happened on July 19th of 2015. Count 1. The jurors of the County of Hamilton, in the name and the authority of the state of Ohio, upon their oath, do find and present that Raymond M. Tenzing, on or about the 19th of July, 2015, at the County of Hamilton and the state of Ohio, aforesaid, purposely caused the death of Samuel DeVos in violation of section 2903.02a of the Ohio Revised Code, and against the peace and dignity of the state of Ohio. Count 2 of this indictment reads, the grand jurors of the County of Hamilton, in the name and by the authority of the state of Ohio, upon their oaths do find and present that Raymond M. Tenzing, on or about the 19th day of July in the year of 2015, at the County of Hamilton and the state of Ohio, aforesaid, knowingly caused the death of Samuel DeVos while the said defendant was under the influence of a sudden passion or a sudden fit of rage, either of which was brought on by serious provocation occasioned by the victim that was reasonably sufficient to incite the defendant into using deadly force. In violation of section 2903.03a of the Ohio Revised Code, and against the peace and dignity of the state of Ohio. This piece of paper brings us here today. This gives us the authority to go forward and for myself and Mr. Teeger to present this case to you. And we believe at the conclusion that you will find Mr. Tenzing, the defendant, guilty. This all started back on July 19th in the year 2015. By all accounts, it was a very warm day that day, just a normal day for everyone. I believe Mr. Tenzing was working that day alone in his patrol car, and he came upon a car that was missing a front license plate. So he ran the plate through his computer, saw that the owner of the car was suspended, and evidence will show that Mr. DeVos was not the owner of the car, and his name is not the one that came up on the printout. In response to that, Mr. Tenzing was in his police car and he followed Mr. DeVos and he pulled him over for a traffic stop. And what happened at that traffic stop is actually what we hear about today. However, we're going to hear a lot of information about a lot of other things that were going on at that time. At that time, in July of 2015, the University of Cincinnati had entered into an agreement of some sort with the city of Cincinnati. There had been a lot of crime and so forth near the University of Cincinnati, and because of this, they had gone to an agreement where UC police officers were able to patrol off of campus. And in fact, on the date in question, Mr. Tenzing's entire patrol was nowhere, it was not at all on the campus. His entire patrol area was off campus. So he was out patrolling around off campus, and that's when he encountered Mr. DeVos. We'll hear a lot of information about why this was, and that there was possibly a lot of crime, and they had a new chief, and he really wanted to cut down. He didn't want the UC students to be fearful. So he encouraged his officers to get out there, make stops, arrest people, really get out there and make your presence known so we can protect our students. And so the officers were doing that. And we'll hear a lot about that, but that's not really what this case is about. This case is about what happened on July 19th between Mr. Tenzing and Mr. DeVos. It's about When Mr. Tenzing pulled over Mr. DeBose and he forgot, and he didn't use his training, and he didn't do the things that he should have done, and he'll tell us he intentionally shot Mr. DeBose. He'll tell you that in his own statement that he intentionally shot him. So this case is specifically, I want you to focus. You're going to hear a lot of stuff about a lot of things in this case. The state of Ohio is going to give you as much information we can. We're going to play, there were 3 UC officers there. We're going to play their entire body camera videos from beginning to end as much as they recorded that day. We're going to play all of Mr. Tenzing's video. We're going to play all of Officer Livingston's video. We're going to play all of Officer Kidd's video. However, the only part that you really need to focus on, the only part that you'll be deciding on in this case are the seconds, minutes between Mr. Tenzing and Mr. DeBose. You're going to see a lot of extra stuff, but I want you to focus in. And remember the elements in the indictment. I want you to focus in. This is only important, the most important part of those seconds. You're going to hear from an expert for us who's going to go through screen by screen, shot by shot, and walk us through the video. It is a very quick encounter. It is a very quick encounter. However, the expert will be able to have us walk through it. You'll be able to use your common sense, listen to him. You'll be able to make your own decisions, and you'll be able to reach a decision in this matter. On that day, Mr. Tenzing acted in contrary to his training. Mr. Tenzing was told not to reach into an automobile, and you'll see it, and he'll even tell you that he was trying to reach into the car to get the keys out to stop anything else that was going to happen. He'll tell you that that's what he did. But after that point, after he reaches in the car, he'll tell you in his statement that he was hung, he was trapped, that he couldn't get unhooked. But once you get to see the video, and you get to slow it down piece by piece, you'll be able to see that Mr. Tenzing was not trapped. He was not hung. At first he says his hand was hung behind the steering wheel. When you get to see the video, his hand was not hung behind the steering wheel. Then he says he doesn't know what he was trapped on. You'll be able to see actually he himself was grabbing onto the seatbelt of Mr. DeBose as he was trying to, I guess, with his hands, stop him from any motion. As he's reaching across, he can't quite get to the keys, so then from the keys he goes to grabbing onto his seatbelt. And you'll get to see all this in the video. And you'll get to see how Mr. DeBose reacts. It's a very quick reaction, but you can almost see him flinch right before the shot's fired. You'll get to all see that frame by frame, step by step, as you work together to decide this case. I read the indictment to you earlier. The state of Ohio, this is clearly the evidence will show, this is a purposeful killing by Mr. Tenzing. Count 2 is a little more complicated, has a lot more words in it, and I just want you to work through. The judge at the end of the case will go through each of the elements of that case, and we just want you to have an idea in your head of what exactly you'll be looking for. Was there provocation by Mr. DeBose? Was Officer Tenzing at the time, was he provoked to the point where he had to pull the gun and shoot him? The state will submit that in this case, the evidence will show that this is clearly a murder. That Mr. Tenzing, the defendant in this matter, pulled out his gun and he shot Mr. DeBose. And at the conclusion of all the evidence, we ask that you find him guilty of all charges. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Matthews, when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court, Mr. Bradbury, Mr. Tinker, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. As Judge Giz has indicated, opening statements are not evidence. They're simply an outline of what we expect both the state of Ohio and the defense will, what we expect the evidence will show as you sit here for the next week or so listening to witnesses testify and see exhibits that are admitted in the trial of this case. All we are doing right now is outlining what we think the evidence will show on behalf of each side here. I just heard Mr. Graffenried's opening statement, and while I can agree with some of what she said, there's a lot of it that I don't agree with. And as I look at each of you, I think I'm probably quite a bit older than most of you, but when I was growing up, my mother used to listen to a guy on the radio that some of you may have heard of by the name of Paul Harvey. Paul Harvey used to have a little radio show where he'd start out and tell a story and get you all curious about what the conclusion of it was. And then there'd be a commercial break, and he would come back and tell the end of the story, and everybody would just be kind of surprised or say, well, I didn't know that. The point of what I'm telling you is that Paul Harvey had a tagline called, "And now you know the rest of the story." And that's what I'm going to do up here today. I'm going to tell you the rest of the story. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case on behalf of the defendant, Ray Kensington, showed that on July 19, 2015, when this case occurred, this incident occurred, Ray was 25 years old. He was a graduate of Coleraine High School. When he went to Coleraine High School, he participated in the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office Explorers Post. That's a group of, which is just beyond the age of Boy Scouts, where the individuals that participate in that have a great desire to learn about a career in law enforcement, and many of them do go on to become law enforcement officers, which is what Ray did. But Ray had a desire since he was a little kid. His dad was a firefighter. Ray would tell you that since that I was a little kid, I wanted to be a policeman. So he was in high school, he was in the Explorer Post. From there, he went to the University of Cincinnati, where he earned a Bachelor of Science degree in criminal justice. And as a part of that, he was able to attend the police academy that the University of Cincinnati has, which at the end of which, if you pass all the tests and take all the courses and do well, you become what's called OPATA certified. That's a certification that every police officer in the state of Ohio must obtain from the state of Ohio in order to become a police officer. Ray took that course and passed it and became OPATA certified. He started out his career as a police officer with the village of Green Hills, and then eventually was hired on at the University of Cincinnati. The reason that he went to university, the reason he was able to get a job at the University of Cincinnati is that crime in the area of UC, both on the campus and around the campus, has been a major issue for years. The powers that be at UC have become overwhelmed and tired of the victimization of UC students in particular, who are, I like to say, young and dumb, probably more young and naive than young and dumb. They're not aware of their surroundings. They're easily victimized in every neighborhood around that campus. The Cincinnati Police Department is a great police department, but they don't have enough officers to saturate the area around the UC campus to protect the students. So the powers that be at UC determined that we're going to increase the size of the police department as one of the manners in which we're going to try to get this criminal element under control around the campus and help our students. They hired a bunch of police officers, and you'll hear probably testimony that among other things, they put up cameras, they put up more street lighting, but the big thing was they hired a bunch of police officers, young police officers. At the same time, they brought in a new police chief by the name of Jason Goodrich, who is no longer the police chief at UC. Chief Goodrich instituted a policy with his officers, and then before I get to that, the city of Cincinnati and the University of Cincinnati had entered into what's called a memorandum of understanding. And in that memorandum of understanding, the city of Cincinnati granted University of Cincinnati police officers the ability to patrol citywide. They didn't have to stay on campus. They could patrol the entire city of Cincinnati. As a practical matter, what they did was the University of Cincinnati officers stayed around the campus. They didn't go all over the city. They just stayed in neighborhoods around campus. And under Chief Goodrich's administration, a series of beats was set up. Beats are the area around campus is broken down to a particular area, and and officers said that is assigned to that beat for that day. You go patrol that area and make sure that everything remains under control. The evidence will show that the officers, one of Chief Goodrich's policies when he came in was, in order to try to get this crime situation under control, I want the officers to be extremely proactive. That means go out and arrest and cite people who are committing violations of the law and get the word out that, you know, if you're coming around to commit crimes or victimize our students, we're out here and we're going to get you. Go somewhere else. And I think the evidence will show that Chief Goodrich's policy was working. He was telling his supervisors to tell your guys to get out there and write tickets and stop people and let them know that they're not welcome. And I'll add that the policy wasn't go out and stop somebody because they're black, or go out and stop somebody because they're white, or go out and stop somebody because they're green or purple. The policy was if you have a legitimate reason, if they're committing some kind of offense, you make that stop. And the UC policy, their procedure manual says if you see a violation of law, you shall investigate it and make a stop or make an arrest. It doesn't say you can if you feel like it, or maybe it'd be all right to do that. It says you shall do it. And the officers that were assigned that were working under Chief Goodrich took that to heart, and they went out and saturated the area around that campus. And I think you'll find through the testimony that the policy was working. Some people think it was extremely harsh, but the policy was working. Crime around UC was dropping dramatically, and the trustees and the people who run UC were happy with the results. One of those officers, again, was Ray Tenzing. And you'll find that Ray Tenzing was active. If he saw a violation, he would make a stop. And before I go any further, you know, I don't know, everybody here, I think, has indicated they've read or heard or watched the first trial. And it keeps coming back to the fact that Ray Tenzing stopped Sam DeBose because he didn't have a front license plate. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's balderdash. Ray Tenzing stopped Sam DeBose after he saw that Sam DeBose did not have a front license plate on that car. But what he saw was no front license plate, and as you were out on the jury scene yesterday, I think the bus may have stopped. When you came down East Hollister and stopped where that intersects with Vine Street, there's a little island there, and Ray was parked next to that island on his way back to his beat after he'd done something else at another location. He was stopped at that island waiting to cross Vine to go up West Hollister back to his particular beat that day. By the way, just because an officer was assigned to a beat didn't mean he wasn't allowed to leave that beat. In any event, Ray was sitting there at East Hollister and Vine when he looked up toward the UC campus where you all drove down from in the bus yesterday, and he noticed Sam DeBose driving down the street. He didn't know it was Sam DeBose. He didn't know whether it was a man or a woman driving. He'll tell you, all I could tell was I saw a red hat and red clothing. I didn't know if it was a man or woman driving, but I noticed that there was not a front license plate on the car. He then, as the car went by him, plugged that license plate into the computer that every UC police car is equipped with. They've got a computer right there that the officer can reach right over and punch a license plate in, and instantly they're told who owns the vehicle, whether the person that the vehicle is registered to has any kind of criminal record, whether their license is under suspension, whether they've been known to be armed and dangerous in the past, and you can even bring up a picture of the registered owner of the car. Ray punched in that license plate that was on the rear of the car, the conduct cord that Sam DeBose was driving. It instantly came up, and you will see from Ray's body camera video, it instantly came up and told Ray that the registered owner of the vehicle was under suspension. Driving under suspension in the state of Ohio is what's known as a first-degree misdemeanor. It's the most serious degree of misdemeanor there is. No front license plate is a minor violation, a simple payout ticket. Driving under suspension is a serious offense, and it's one that I believe any police officer anywhere would make a stop for if they knew that the driver was under suspension. Ray's curiosity was aroused. He sees that the registered owner of the vehicle is under suspension. suspension, and he decided he would make a traffic stop. So rather than going across Vine Street, up West Hollister and back to his beat, Ray turned left onto Vine Street and followed Sam DeBose. As they got down to Phil Street, and that's the street that the bus turned off of and ended up there by Rice Street. But Sam DeBose turned on to Phil Street, put his signal on, indicated he was turning on to Phil Street, as Ray Tenzing lit up his cruiser lights, indicating he wanted Sam DeBose to pull over. Sam did not immediately pull over, and that started to cause some concern with Ray Tenzing, but not a lot, because he figured, he's turning on to Phil Street, that'll get us out of traffic on Vine Street, and we'll be in a more safe area. Sam did not pull over immediately on Phil Street. He continued on up the street, and you'll hear on the body camera video that Ray was wearing and that was activated, you'll hear him hit the yelper on the siren a couple of times. Sam still did not pull over. He proceeded on up to the end of Phil Street, where it dead ends into Rice Street, and turned on to Rice, at which time he pulled over. Ray got out of his car. While he was following him, Ray called out on his radio that he was making the traffic stop, as he's supposed to do. He notified the dispatcher, or he said in his notification to the dispatcher, that the car that he was stopping was slow to stop. Slow to stop is a term used by police officers that has meaning to police officers when they hear it. And I'll tell you, slow to stop means generally the guy's not pulling over right away like most people do when they're signaled to stop, signal to pull over. He's not pulling over, he's being slow to do that. And to officers, that indicates one of a multitude of things that could be happening. The individual could be hiding something in the car. No matter what, he's picking the place where he's going to stop, which is of some concern to officers. But it also means he could be hiding something in the car, he could be tossing contraband out of the car, or he could be picking a spot to get out and run. So Ray called out slow to stop. Officers David Lindenschmidt and Philip Kidd and Joel Lindenschmidt were also working. They were a two-man cruiser that day. Lindenschmidt was an officer in training. Officer Kidd was his training officer. They were working another beat off of the UC campus. They heard Ray say, "I'm pulling over a car that's slow to stop," and they'll tell you they decided to head down to Phil Street because Ray had called out the location, and they knew that Phil Street was not the best area of town, that's the best part of town. They decided they would go down and back Ray up. You will hear that as Ray got out of his car, he approached Sam DeBose's car on the driver's side, and you'll hear on his body camera video, he asked Sam DeBose multiple times for a driver's license. He realized at this point that the car was registered to a female whose license was suspended. He obviously saw Sam DeBose and knew that he was not a female. So he figured he's not the registered owner of the car, but he wanted to see if Sam had a driver's license. Sam never responded directly. He said, I have one. You'll hear it on the tape, so I'm not going to tell you exactly what the wording is because I don't remember, because he had so many excuses and dodges and so on. He never did answer the question about whether he had a driver's license, which in and of itself made Ray Tenzing, an experienced police officer at that point, question whether Sam did have a valid driver's license, and it turns out he did not. He was under suspension. But, ladies and gentlemen, during the course of Ray asking Sam 7 or 8 times, do you have a license, and the first thing he wanted to do was determine who Sam was, Ray noticed a bottle on the floorboard between Sam's legs, and it said gin on it. It was full. As an experienced police officer, Ray immediately thinks, well, perhaps I'm dealing with somebody who's impaired, under the influence maybe. He asked Sam, what's that? And Sam handed Ray the bottle that's marked gin, and Ray put that bottle up on the roof of the car. What's significant about that is that when Ray put that up on the roof of the car, I think you'll find that Ray wasn't done with inquiring about the gin bottle. He was going to get back to that after he determined who Sam was. And the reason I think you can make that inference is that when Ray first approached Sam, Sam asked him, why did he stop me? He said, he didn't have the front license plate. And Sam, oh, I've got that. He took the keys out of the ignition and reached over into the glove box and started to pull the front license plate out, and there was a front license plate in the glove box. Ray told Sam, he said, don't worry about that. He said, that belongs on the front of the car. I'm not concerned with that. So Ray kind of blew off Sam's attempt to show him he had a front license plate. Ray wasn't concerned about that. On the other hand, the gin bottle was something that concerned Ray. He wanted to get back to it. But before any of that could happen, Ray continues to ask Sam, who are you? Do you have a license? And Sam won't give him a straight answer. At this point, Kid and Lindenschmidt are pulling up. Ray says to Sam, and you'll again see this on the body camera video, Ray says to Sam, until I can figure out who you are, go ahead and step out of the car for me. At that point, Ray started to open the car door. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, one of the other pieces of evidence that we will be showing to you is on that July 19th day, Ray Tenzing activated his body-worn camera 3 times prior to his encounter with Sandy Bowes. I'm going to show those to you. One of those encounters, he was backing up another UC police officer on a traffic stop. The other one, which is of significance, but I'm going to tell you right now, it takes about 35 minutes to play, and for the most part, it's extremely boring. But in that video, you will see Ray have the driver remain in the car while he handcuffs him in the car, and then he gets him out. And that was his purpose in opening Sam's car door. You can't handcuff him in the car if the door is closed. So he was going to open the door, have Sam take his seatbelt off, handcuff him, and detain him until he could determine who he was. Sam didn't like that fact, and at the point that Ray is opening the car door with his left hand, Sam grabs the door and pulls it shut and places his left arm over Ray's left arm. Well, let me back up. Sam pulls the door shut. That's a first act of active resistance for what's going on here. Sam pulled the door shut. At the same time, somehow Sam, at some point, and I don't think this is in the video, I don't think you can see it in the video, but at some point Sam, who had removed the keys from the ignition to open the glove box, had put the keys back into the ignition. And as he is reaching with his left hand, Sam is, to close the car door. With his right hand, he is starting the Honda, starting the ignition. And as soon as he does that, he drops his hand to the gear shift, which is in the center console, and puts it into drive. And in order to put the car into drive, to move off, you have to have your foot on the brake. Sam puts the car in drive, mashes the accelerator, and takes off. Starts to take off. Ray, feeling like, and he'll tell you, he made a mistake, that he felt like he was so close that he could reach into that car and somehow get those keys out of the ignition and stop Sam from taking off. He was unsuccessful. He reached into the car. As he reached into the car with his left hand, Sam DeBose put his left arm over the top of Ray's left arm and pinned his hand against the steering wheel. You'll see that on the body-worn camera. And Ray told investigators in his statement his intention was to reach through the steering wheel. He thought his arm was through the steering wheel and caught in the steering wheel. I think the evidence will show that rather than that, his arm was pinned to both the windowsill and his hand was pinned to the steering wheel as Sam DeBose mashed that accelerator and took off. And what happened when that occurred was that Ray Tenzing's body was spun to his left. He started to fall. His arm is trapped in there. Sam DeBose is driving off, and Ray thought he was going to get sucked under the rear wheels and run over and drag him to death, or seriously hurt. As all that's happening, Ray pulled out his service revolver with his service weapon with his right hand and fired one shot at whatever he could fire at to stop the threat to hit what he thought was a threat to his life. And that shot entered the head of Sam DeBose and resulted in his death. Ray Tenzing's purpose at that point was not to cause the death of Sam DeBose. It was not to hurt Sam DeBose. It was to stop the threat that Sam DeBose, the Ray Tenzing, felt that Sam DeBose posed to his life. I apologize for going on. Normally I don't talk a whole lot. I believe in keeping things short. But this case is so important that you understand what the facts are, because I've been up here for I don't know how many minutes at this point, but this whole incident that I'm talking about, from the starting to open the car door to Sam DeBose taking off and being shot, lasted less than 3 seconds. And you'll see a video clip of this, and it's just phenomenal how much can happen in that short period. As Mr. Graffenreid indicated, there will be video analysts who will come in here who have watched this thing 100 or 1,000 times, and they're going to tell you what they think was shown. But at the end of the day, as we talked about in Ward Dyer, it's your call to figure out what it showed. And this, ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you right now, this is not like an NFL football game or an NBA basketball game where you've got 10 cameras looking at the same thing from different angles, and you get to look at all kinds of different views of what occurred. This happened in 2.853 seconds, I think. You've got one camera, it's blurry. Parts of it are very blurry. It's difficult to see some things, but I think that at the end of the day, you will find that Ray Tenzing had a legitimate fear that he was about to be dragged by that car, that he in fact was dragged. A lot has been made about the issue of the term, the meaning of the term drag. The evidence will show, and we saw the manhole cover. Let me back up here. When Ray Tenzing pulled over Sam DeBose, there was a silver car occupied by a girl by the name of Alicia Napier. She'll testify at some point in this trial. She was in the car with her 2 kids. If you remember the house at the corner of Rice and Phil, her mother-in-law and boyfriend, her mother-in-law lived there at that house. And she was there with her kids and getting ready to leave. So she had them in the car and was attempting to get them in the child seat and the seatbelt when all this happened. She'll tell you that her car was parked some feet in front of where Sam DeBose pulled over. As Sam DeBose took off, he had to turn his car to the left to get around and avoid hitting her. So he actively turned his car into the left with Ray Tenzing standing right next to him. And that's where Ray Tenzing started to go down, and that's where Ray Tenzing said he was dragged. The evidence will show that he ended up falling off of the car up by the manhole cover toward the left-hand side of the street, which is some distance, not a great distance, perhaps 15 or 20 feet up the street from where he had started out next to Sam DeBose's car. But when you drag, and Ray used the term, I was being dragged. When you're dragged, the state said, oh, he wasn't dragged, and their video analysts will say he wasn't dragged. Well, being dragged has to start somewhere, ladies and gentlemen, and I submit that maybe Ray's choice of the word drag was not correct, but when Sam DeBose mashed that accelerator and turned left to take off out of that, or started a left-hand turn to take him off from that traffic stop, he turned right into Ray Tenzing and threw him off balance, which caused him to start to fall. And you will see on the body-worn camera how Ray ended up and how that car narrowly missed him as Sam DeBose took off. Ladies and gentlemen, the testimony in this case, I think, will eventually come down to a decision that you make. The experts will be here to assist what you hear, but you ultimately have to make a decision. And I told you there will be 3 other videos that will show what Ray Tenzing was about that day. And I told you, I started to tell you about the one that's about 35 minutes long. Among other things, that video shows Ray Tenzing stopping a vehicle on McMillan, which was operated by a male African-American. His wife was in the car. They had 4 kids in the back seat. The kids didn't have child seats or seat belts. The car did not have a front license plate. The car, I believe, the registered owner was under suspension. Ray made a traffic stop. It turned out that, and he handcuffed the driver As he sat in the car, Ray handcuffed the driver. His purpose was to detain him, to figure out what was going on. You'll find in that traffic stop, and a lot of people will be critical, why did you have to handcuff him in front of your kids? Well, you'll find, ladies and gentlemen, that Ray was polite to everybody involved in that. When he got the driver out, first he handcuffed him in the car. He got the driver out of the car. The driver said these handcuffs are too tight or they're uncomfortable. The first thing Ray did when he got him out of the car was adjust the handcuffs to make him more comfortable. He took Ray back to his cruiser. This was July 19, 2015. It was an extremely hot day. Ray put the driver in the backseat of his cruiser. He told the driver, I'll put the air conditioning on for you, which he did. He then got out of his cruiser. He went back to the driver's car, whose wife and kids were in the car. He determined that he gave his wife the keys and said, here, turn the air conditioning on so you can keep the kids cool. I mean, this is not a guy, they want to portray him as a racist. He wasn't a racist. He wasn't a hardhead, no-nonsense cop. He was an extremely human kind of a guy who was polite and respectful of people. The kids, it turned out in that traffic stop that the driver was not only under suspension, he had 5 open warrants on him, meaning he had 5 times he had been cited for other things and hadn't shown up at court. His wife was under suspension, so there wasn't a valid driver of the car. Ray Tenzing could have arrested that man, taken him to the Justice Center, and had the car towed. But what did Ray do? And that's why it lasts 35 minutes, because he gave him a ticket for the driving under suspension, and I think no child restraint, or no child seat in the car, whatever it is. He also had to write a ticket because he recited, rather than haul the man to jail, which he could have very easily done, he recited him for the 5 times he hadn't shown up previously and said, here, show up this time. His wife, who was not valid, they didn't have a valid driver, he could have towed the car and left the family standing on the side of the road. Ray didn't do that. He asked the wife, he said, can you call somebody that's got a valid license and have them come pick up the car, which is exactly what they did. So everybody drove away from him. Big stop you're going to see of the 3 that I showed you occurred about 6 o'clock on July 31st. And this incident with Sam DeBose occurred at 6:31 p.m. At 5:58, Ray stopped another car occupied by a female African American and a male African American. That car also, he stopped that car as it was going into Bellevue Park, which is across Vine Street from where we were yesterday. Yesterday we were by Inwood Park, which, by the way, somebody was shot there yesterday morning, apparently, right before we were up there. But that's Inwood Park. Ray stopped this other car in Bellevue Park, and that car also did not have a front license plate, and it also came back registered to a female who was under suspension. When Ray approached that stopped vehicle, he asked the female driver, whose car is this? She said, it's my friend's. He said, do you have a license? She produced a valid Ohio driver's license. The male who was with her produced a valid Ohio driver's license. Ray took those licenses, went back to his cruiser, ran the people through his in-car computer. Turned out neither one of them had any warrants. Everything was good. They had valid licenses. He returned to the car, gave them the licenses back, and said, have a nice day. And the lady said, you too, officer. And that was the end of it. 4 or 5 minutes, and everything was fine. The point of that, ladies and gentlemen, is, again, Ray Tenzing was professional, he was courteous, he was polite, and had Sam DeBose cooperated with him, his stop wouldn't have ended the same way because of the things that Sam DeBose was up to. But Sam DeBose wouldn't have ended up shot. Sam had simply complied with Ray Tenzing. He would have gone to jail because you'll hear evidence that in the car with Sam DeBose, or on Sam DeBose's person, was $2,600 in cash and some marijuana, and found in various places in the car was another quantity of marijuana that was enough to add up to a felony charge. And with a felony charge, Sam DeBose would have been going to the Justice Center from that traffic stop had Ray Tenzing had an opportunity to discover it. Ladies and gentlemen, I think at the end of this case, you will find that It's a terrible tragedy. What happened to Sam DeBose is terrible. But Sam DeBose, all he had to do was cooperate with the officer. He would have gone to the Justice Center, and from there, who knows what would have happened, but he wouldn't have been shot. But Ray Tenzing, as he made that traffic stop, he didn't anticipate that Sam DeBose was going to drive off with Ray's arm caught in that car. And I think you'll find that this all happened so quick that instinctively Ray Tenzing did the only thing that he could do to save his own life or to save himself from being seriously injured. And as for the voluntary manslaughter, which Mr. Graffenreid read to you about being a sudden fit of passion or a sudden fit of rage, you're not going to find any evidence that supports that. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit at the end of this case you will find that Ray Tenzing was justified in what he did, and I think you'll find that without having heard the law that Judge Giz is going to explain to you. When you hear that law, I think you'll have absolutely no doubt that he was justified in what he did and that he's not guilty of either of the offenses